You're sitting across the table from someone who never raises their voice, never picks fights. The kind of person who remembers your coffee order and asks about your mother before she asks about anything else. And yet, lately, something about them feels different. Sharper, a little colder around the edges. You can't quite name it, but you feel it, the way you feel a change in weather before you see a single cloud. Here's what you don't know yet. That person, sitting there so calmly, might be aging faster than you are. Not from stress in the way you think. Not from sleep or diet or anything you'd find on a wellness app. Something else entirely. Something written into their cells by the people around them. We'll get to that, but not yet. Because first, you need to understand something bigger. Something almost nobody talks about out loud. We're living through a quiet epidemic of toxicity. Not the dramatic kind. Not the villain in a movie kind. The small kind. The kind that shows up as a short reply, a cutting comment, a friend who suddenly seems harder to be around. And it's getting worse. Not because people are getting worse. That's the part everyone gets wrong. This is not a story about bad people. This is not a story about weak willpower or some generational flaw or a world that's simply gone soft. This is a story about a 2 million-year-old survival system, still running in your skull, trying to protect you from a world it was never built for. You feel it every time your chest tightens before an email, every time your jaw clenches in traffic for no real reason, every time you snap at someone you love over something that, an hour later, doesn't even matter. That's not a character flaw switching on. That's ancient machinery misfiring. And here's what most people miss. The very same wiring that once kept your ancestors alive, the one that scanned for threats, braced for danger, turned strangers into suspects, is still running today. Except now, it's not scanning for predators in grass. It's scanning your inbox, your group chat, your feed. Stay with me, because the story of why we're all a little more on edge than we used to be doesn't start with social media, or politics, or kids these days. It starts millions of years ago, in the bones of your ancestors, and it ends somewhere much closer to home than you'd expect. Picture Maya, 31 years old, marketing manager, the kind of person her friends call the calm one. For 3 weeks straight, she's been covering for a coworker on leave, answering emails at 10 at night, sitting through meetings that could have been a single sentence, watching her own work pile up in the dark while she handles everyone else's. She doesn't complain. She just keeps going, the way people who pride themselves on being easy to work with tend to keep going, right up until they don't. Then, on a Tuesday, a colleague asks her, gently, almost kindly, whether she's finished a report that isn't even due until Friday. And Maya snaps. Not loudly, just a flash of something sharp in her voice, gone as fast as it arrived. She apologizes 10 seconds later. She spends the rest of the day replaying it in her head, wondering what's wrong with her. Nothing's wrong with her. Something is wrong with her wiring, and it's not her fault. Here's the part nobody explains well. Deep inside your brain sits a small, almond-shaped cluster of neurons called the amygdala, your body's ancient alarm system. Its entire job, for millions of years, was to detect danger fast and respond faster. A rustle in tall grass, a shadow moving where it shouldn't. No time for careful thought. Just react, survive, sort out the details later. The amygdala doesn't know the difference between a predator and a passive-aggressive email. It just knows your cortisol has been climbing for 3 straight weeks. Your body has been quietly bracing for danger that never fully arrives. And now, one more small demand lands on top of it all. The alarm goes off. The rational, slower part of your brain, the part that would normally step in and say this isn't actually an emergency, gets crowded out. Psychologists call this an amygdala hijack. The moment your threat response system overrides your judgment before your judgment even gets a vote. You felt this. Maybe not at work. Maybe in traffic, or at the dinner table, or in a text you sent and regretted within the hour. It's not a personality problem. It's a system built for lions, running full speed inside a world made of inboxes. But it gets stranger, because this alarm system didn't appear out of nowhere. Go back far enough, past your parents, past their parents, past thousands of generations, and you find something unexpected, Researchers studying fossilized teeth from early human ancestors recently discovered that our ancient relatives were repeatedly exposed to lead in their environment for more than 2 million years. Not from factories or paint, from volcanic activity, from soil, from the natural world itself. And this ancient, low-grade chemical stress appears to have shaped the very wiring involved in how the brain manages threat and communication. We're not built by accident. We're built by exposure. Millions of years of low-grade environmental stress didn't just happen to us. It shaped us, gene by gene, generation by generation. Your nervous system isn't broken. It's inherited. And what it inherited was a world that was, in its own way, quietly toxic long before humans existed. We'll come back to that. Hold that thought. Now step back further than biology, into something older than any brain scan. Long before neuroscience had a name for any of this, a man who survived a concentration camp wrote something that stayed relevant for 80 years. Viktor Frankl noticed that between whatever happens to a person and however that person responds, there's a gap, small, often invisible, but real. And inside that gap lives the only freedom any of us actually have. Most of us never find that gap, not because we're weak, because modern life doesn't leave room to look for it. We fill every quiet moment, every red light, every waiting room, every second before sleep, with a screen, a scroll, a distraction. Frankl would say the pain doesn't disappear when we do that. It just goes underground. And pain that goes underground doesn't stay still. It turns into something else, something colder, something that comes out sideways, at people who didn't cause it. The philosopher Erich saw a version of this coming decades ago, too. He described a shift in how people relate to their own lives, from a mode of simply being present and whole into a mode of having, collecting status, followers, achievements, proof. When your sense of self depends on what you have instead of who you are, every small threat to that pile, a slight, a comparison, someone else's success, starts to feel like a threat to your entire identity. And a threatened identity doesn't respond with patience. It responds the way Maya did. Sharp, fast, then confused about where that came from. None of this is happening because people got worse. It's happening because the gap Frankl talked about keeps getting smaller, and the alarm system evolution built keeps firing at things it was never designed to face. So let's pause here for a second, because it's worth naming what we've actually found so far. An alarm system built for lions, now firing at emails. A nervous system shaped by 2 million years of low-grade environmental stress, still running the same defensive code. A gap between what happens to you and what you do next. A gap most of us never even know exists because modern life never gives us the silence to find it. Put those three things together, and you start to see something most people never quite connect. The sharp comment, the short temper, the person who used to be warm and now feels distant. None of that is random. It's mechanical. It's explainable. And if it's explainable, it's not a life sentence. If you've made it this far, you already know this isn't the kind of video that hands you 5 quick tips and moves on. It's going to keep going deeper into what's happening in your own mind when you scroll and why an entire generation is being shaped by a machine built to make you angry. If that's useful to you, the way you tell me is simple. Hit subscribe and drop a comment with the moment you caught yourself reacting before you meant to. I read those. They shape what I make next. Now, here's where it gets uncomfortable. Because so far, we've talked about biology and philosophy. Force is bigger than any one person. But there's another layer underneath all of this. One that lives inside your own mind, and inside the minds of the people who frustrate you the most. Most of us grew up believing that toxic people are simply bad people. That if someone is cruel, manipulative, or constantly picking fights, it's because something is fundamentally wrong with their character. And honestly, that's not an unreasonable thing to believe. We've all met someone who seems to leave a trail of damage everywhere they go, and it's hard not to draw a conclusion from that pattern. Holding people accountable for how they treat others is how we protect ourselves and how we decide who to trust. That instinct isn't foolish. It's how humans have always kept each other safe. But here's the part that gets left out. Underneath almost every pattern of toxic behavior, there's a defense mechanism running quietly in the background. one most people never learn to recognize in themselves or in anyone else. Sigmund Freud was one of the first to describe it. He noticed that when a feeling gets pushed down instead of felt, grief, humiliation, fear, it doesn't vanish. It gets rerouted. It shows up later, often at the wrong target, dressed up as anger or contempt instead of whatever it actually was. Carl Jung took this further. He described something he called the shadow, the parts of ourselves we can't stand to look at directly, so we bury them. And here's what most people miss. The shadow doesn't stay buried. It gets projected. You see a trait in someone else that irritates you far more than it should, and there's a decent chance you're looking at a piece of yourself you haven't made peace with. Scroll through any comment section and you'll see this in real time. Thousands of strangers working through something private in public on someone else's post and never once naming it for what it is. And then there's Alfred Adler, who spent his career studying a different piece of the puzzle. What happens when someone feels small? Adler argued that a deep sense of inferiority, often planted young, often invisible even to the person carrying it, doesn't just sit there quietly. It looks for relief. And one of the fastest ways to feel bigger is to make someone else feel smaller. That's not villainy. That's a wound wearing a disguise, walking around in a work meeting or a group chat looking for somewhere to put itself down. None of this excuses harm, but it explains it, and explanation is the first thing that lets you stop taking it so personally. Now widen the lens, because none of this happens in a vacuum. The physician Gabor, Maté, has spent decades studying what he calls the trade we're all quietly forced to make: authenticity for belonging. In a culture where your value gets measured by output, performance, and how well you fit in, expressing what you actually feel becomes a liability. So people learn to swallow it. Maté calls this self-silencing. And here's the cost nobody warns you about. Everything you silence doesn't disappear. It waits. There's one more thing worth understanding here. The philosopher Byung-Chul describes modern life as an achievement society, a world where nobody's standing over you with a whip anymore. You don't need one. You become your own boss, your own critic, your own relentless taskmaster, driving yourself toward burnout under the illusion that it's all your own free choice. Hahn calls this auto-exploitation, and it's arguably more exhausting than the old kind, because there's no one left to blame but yourself. And to cover the exhaustion that creates, we've built an entire culture around forced positivity. The pressure to caption the bad days, smile through the burnout, turn every struggle into a growth lesson for an audience. Psychologists have a name for this too: toxic positivity. It doesn't heal anything. It just adds a layer of shame on top of whatever you were already feeling for daring to feel it in the first place. Put Freud, Jung, Adler, Maté, and Hahn side by side, and a pattern starts to surface. This is not a story about individual weakness. This is not a story about a generation that simply lost its manners. This is a story about millions of people, each quietly carrying more than they're allowed to put down, in a culture that keeps telling them to smile anyway. Now watch what happens next, because this is where all of it collides: biology, philosophy, psychology, into something you interact with every single day: your phone. Here's the uncomfortable truth about the internet. It didn't create toxicity. It found it, and then it turned up the volume. Anonymity strips away the social consequences that usually keep behavior in check. A pattern researchers first documented decades ago in a famous psychology experiment, where ordinary volunteers, given power and anonymity in a simulated prison, escalated into cruelty faster than anyone running the study expected. Online, that same effect runs at global scale, every hour of every day, with a comment box instead of a cell block. But here's the twist almost nobody sees coming. Researchers at Stanford recently compared what people believe about online toxicity to what's actually happening on the platforms. And the gap is staggering. On average, people estimated that around 43% of Reddit users post severely toxic comments. The real number? Roughly 3%. A tiny, hyperactive minority, loud enough and amplified enough to make an entire platform feel hostile. Pay attention to this part because it matters. The algorithm isn't showing you reality. It's showing you whatever keeps your thumb moving, and outrage keeps thumbs moving better than almost anything else. Negativity bias, your brain's tendency to weigh bad things more heavily than good ones, is ancient and useful when you're actually in danger. But an algorithm doesn't care why that bias exists. It only cares that it works. So it feeds you the sharpest 3% over and over until you start to believe the whole world has gotten cruel. It hasn't. You're just being shown a very loud, very small slice of it on a loop. This same distortion follows you off the feed and into your closest relationships. Take Alex, mid-20s, been on and off dating apps for 2 years, recently matched with someone who seemed almost too easy to talk to. Big plans got made early. A future got sketched out within weeks. Whole imagined apartments and imagined trips before they'd even met each other's friends. Then, slowly, the plans got vaguer. The replies got slower, sometimes a full day of silence with no explanation. Warmth would return just often enough to keep Alex hooked, then vanish again, right when Alex started to pull back. Psychologists studying manipulation call this constellation the dark tetrad. Narcissism, manipulation, a lack of empathy, and in some cases, outright enjoyment of someone else's confusion and hurt. In modern dating, it shows up with its own vocabulary now. Future faking, promising a life together with no intention of building it. Snacking, offering just enough attention to keep someone on the hook without ever committing to more. These aren't quirks of modern romance. They're old patterns of exploitation, dressed in new language, running at the speed of a text message. And here's the part that should genuinely worry you, whether you've dated someone like this or simply live near one. Researchers at NYU recently tracked thousands of people, and something they called hasslers, the people in your life who reliably create friction, criticism, or stress. What they found wasn't just emotional. It was biological. Each additional hassler in someone's close network was linked to measurably faster biological aging, roughly 9 months over time, along with higher levels of inflammation markers tied to heart disease and cognitive decline. Remember the person from the beginning of this video. The calm one. The one who seemed a little colder lately, a little sharper around the edges. That's the loop closing. Exposure to chronic toxicity doesn't just make you feel worn down. It writes itself into your cells. Every person who quietly drains you isn't just costing you a bad afternoon. They're costing you time at a level your body keeps count of even when you don't. Which brings us back to where this story actually started. Not with a phone, not with dating, but with lead buried in the teeth of your ancestors 2 million years ago. Their brains evolved defenses against the toxic environment they never chose. And in a strange, almost poetic turn, your brain is doing the same thing right now, mounting an ancient defense against a different kind of toxicity. Not lead and soil this time. Cortisol from your inbox. Inflammation from a hassler you can't quite cut out of your life. Outrage from a feed built to feed on it. Your ancestors adapted to survive their toxic world. The question the science is quietly asking you now is whether you're going to let your world shape you the same way, or whether you're finally going to notice the gap Frankl talked about, right as it's happening. So here's what all of this actually adds up to. First, the truth about the topic. Toxicity isn't a character flaw, and it isn't a mystery. It's an ancient survival system doing exactly what it evolved to do in an environment it was never designed for. Cortisol, negativity bias, self-silencing, auto-exploitation, different names, same underlying story. A brain built for danger, misfiring in a world made of notifications. Then there's what this means for you, specifically. The people who drain you aren't just an inconvenience. They're a measurable cost, one your body keeps track of whether you notice or not. And the algorithm you scroll every day isn't showing you the world as it is. It's showing you the loudest 3% on repeat until it starts to feel like the whole picture. Knowing that changes what you owe your attention to, and who. And last, the one worth sitting with longest. Somewhere between what happens to you and what you do next, there's a gap. Frankl found it in a concentration camp, of all places, and it's still there for the rest of us, waiting, usually buried under a scroll or a snapped reply we didn't mean to send. You don't need to fix the whole system to find that gap. You just need one quiet second, one time, to notice it's there before you react. That's not nothing. That's the only real freedom any of us ever had. So here's what I want to know. Of everything in this video, the ancient wiring, the algorithm, the hasslers quietly aging you, which one do you think is shaping your worst moments the most? Tell me below. I read every one, because in the end, the world isn't getting crueler. It's getting louder. And somewhere in that noise, there's still a version of you with enough room to choose something different.